Hello, I'm your host, Dr. Michael Lynch, and welcome to Exterior Forces. On one of my former episodes, I did a little expose on dowsing and how people use it to communicate with consciousness outside the human body. Well, we all understand that there are exterior forces which control and conduct our lives. Some of these we talked about as being from a medium of which information is transferred back and forth. This medium surrounds us, engulfs us with information that is sometimes related to in different ways. So our bodies respond to certain forms of information, and so do our ears and eyes, our senses. But there could be also some type of medium out there that is connected to a spiritual realm, a spiritual energy, you might say. Well, in dowsing, which I'll show you today that the concept of dowsing is very simple. It just requires a quietening of the mind and a little meditation. But basically, in dowsing, what we'll explain today is that it's a very unique way of testing the medium or the reality in which we live. Now, basic dowsing rods are non-magnetic, and they date back to the Dark Ages, to the Renaissance period, where people, after the Roman Empire had fallen, the people were looking for water resources, and they would call the water witch. A water witch is someone who could douse, and they could walk around with a willow reed, or maybe the palm of their hand, and find water, or minerals, or whatever else the village required. The whole idea is that after the Roman Empire collapsed, the Roman Empire created viaducts running from freshwater springs to major metropolitan areas. But along the way, in between, there was no water. So peasants, left upon their own accord, had to find freshwater springs, digging wells and creating their own systems. This is where the water witch became a valuable part of the community. Not only could they find minerals like metals and steels that they could mine, they could also do a little dowsing, find the freshwater resources, and then they could dig wells and again restart up their communities. Water witching dates back several thousand years, and so do other things like prophets and psychics. As long as man's been on the earth, there's always been someone who can douse or connect with the spiritual world. Well, these dowsing rods are quite simple. They are a bent brass rod. This is about 12 inches long. The idea is that because it's 12 inches long, you can draw it off into segments. And these segments can stand for 12 months of the year, 12 hours on the clock, 12 feet in depth, or whatever. Even numbers are calculated. So if you want the number 6, like ask a question, is it 6 feet down or is it 6 feet in front of me? The dowsing rods could then show you that it is the number 6. Now I've put a little tape on the end just so that you can see them a little clearly. And basically the handles are made out of copper. I just like copper. It's a good conductor of electricity. And the brass rods and the copper both are non-magnetic. Now, working with wood or other items, they are also non-magnetic. Now, a lot of people suggest not to touch the rods themselves, so they put the little handles on there. Now, I've seen them in wood, I've seen them in plastic, I've seen them very decorative, hand-carved wood for a better grip, and I've seen them in big pins as well. Touching the rod may not be as a requirement as actually the motion of the rod. Now, we have to assume that we're asking questions under a pretense that we do not know really what the answers are. So we have to ask them in yes and no. So you have to decide you have to find which is your yes side and which is your no side. Normally, you have to ask your guides for this. So normally my right side is my yes side and my no side is my left side. Because my brain, the way it's wired, conducts it that way. The electromagnetic flow through my body is actually part and parcel on the way the communications work. Now, everyone talks that they have an auric field, a field of aura, which is bioelectricity around them. And this is part and parcel on how the communication really works. But the fluctuation of this bioelectric field, and also through the brain, these rods move. So they don't really have to be metal at all. They could be wood, they could be probably plastic. But we have found out that with metal, the more that you temper it or warm it up, the more accurate or the more energetic they become. So I have polished these with steel wool or sandpaper, and I've increased the heat incredibly. And the more I warm them up, a little more flamboyant in their motion and accuracy. Now, I know some people, they actually suggest to heat them up with a torch, a saline torch, and to make sure that they're entirely tempered. Then they let them cool, polish them up, and they say they get a better response from that tempering. And I think so too. I think with a little tempering, they actually work pretty well. The key is that I found out through the whole process with metal dowsing rods that the better 90-degree angle you have, a little bit better that it slides around on the handle. Now, I know a lot of people use wood or whatever, but I think the 90 degrees has something to do with also the way it actually moves. So what we have is what we could call dowsing rods. Now, the way I came across this was because I had to get my doctorate in parapsychology. And like tarot cards and other things, this is a way that someone can translate or communicate ideas and expressions to make decisions. Again, many of the questions that you ask are blind, like someone's health or my future, or what will happen during the day. Should I buy red shoes versus black shoes? So the whole question is, you can ask your guides, and your guides can give their opinion on what your decision could be, or their opinion on someone else's health. So when you do something like over the phone, your guides can actually go there and still communicate with you via your dowsing rods. Dowsing rods alone don't necessarily work for everyone. That takes time and patience and meditation for you to quietly adjust to the information that's coming through your electromagnetic field. Now, there are certain brain waves attached to all this, so don't just think it's just a bioelectromagnetic field. It has very little to do with it, but there is some type of medium or energy that is moving the rods unbeknownst to you. It's not like a Ouija board, and it's not like tarot cards, to where a Ouija board is moving a planchette around, or like a tarot card that you're trying to translate the actual card itself. This is basically a yes and no situation. So if I have to ask yes and no questions, and a lot of people start getting a little romantic with their guides and start talking to them not as yes and no, but as just direct conversation. In these direct conversations, you lose the criteria for the relationship, I feel, that really is needed for the guide and person relationship. Always thank your guides. Always, consider your guides as an expert in what they're going to tell you, because they have a way of finding out information that you just may not have that capability. I know that in many cases with a professional dowser, I can spend 5 or 10 minutes with them, and they'll give me more information than I could find in 2 or 3 days searching on the internet. So somehow, through the questions that you ask versus the response that you get, somewhere in the middle, depending on that ratio, is your percentage of accuracy. Now, your guides may claim that they're accurate 100% of the time, but it's all in translation, because you're trying to receive a signal to a direct question, and there may be more gray than there is black and white. So in some cases, in many cases, I have to ask a variation of questions that are yes and no in order to get a more complex idea of what I'm trying to talk about. So we'll look at this again, and I put again a little piece of tape on the ends so that you might be able to see them a little bit better. It's just for the viewing audience. And so, so please show me which way is yes, please. Which direction is yes? And they're pointing to my right. Now, please show me which way is no, please. And is pointing to my left. So now I've established yes and no. So the next thing is to establish a question, like, is it sunshiny outside? And the question is yes. The answer is yes. It's really partly cloudy, but it's sunshiny. And he's agreeing with me on that. So I can ask other questions, like, is the air too polluted for certain species on the Earth? And the answer is yes. We know that up in northern Colorado, or up in the high mountains of Colorado, many of the species of trees are dying, not only due to insects, but because of pollution from California. And Colorado is not as beautiful as it once was. So many species on the planet, such as trees and some insects, are dying off because just of pollution and thinning of our own ozone. So our guides can find that information for us and translate it to us. Now, I have in my mind several questions I already know the answers to, so that's why we can do this demonstration. Now, again, when you're investigating someone's health or looking for water, the dowsing rods will have a tendency to cross. So they'll cross for me, and that will normally tell me where to dig for water, or that the object that I'm seeking is right below me. When you're looking at vortexes or energy fields or ley lines, they may want to expand, going out like that to show you the strength of the vortex of energy. Now, many people go on haunted investigations, and they don't understand the idea of vortexes that naturally come from the Earth. Using dowsing rods, you can get an idea of the strength of the vortexes and the energy in which they derive. A tri-field meter will not be able to do this, and neither will a K2 meter. They will be able to find ambient electromagnetic energy, but they will not tell you the size or density of electromagnetic vortexes. And he's agreeing with me. So in many cases, when you dowse, you can go into a haunted location, or you can just dowse at your desk. And the more you do it, the better you get, and the more you will trust the information that's coming through. It took me a couple of years just to be able to get a response, but it took a couple of years of meditation in order to get there. And also relaxing of the mind, letting information just kind of come through you. Some people call it an idea of inspiration. And in this case, I don't receive any information in my head. I don't get the yes and no's in my head. What I do is I get them only via the dowsing rods. So I'm about as psychic as a rock, but the dowsing rods and my guides kind of give me a little bit better idea of what's going on. So that's basically the rough it of dowsing. Again, I've seen dowsing rods that collapse. I've seen dowsing rods that you can put in your pocket. I've seen dowsing rods with very beautiful crystals on them and decorations, and they can be used in many sorts of things. Now, I know a lot of people out there are using what they call ghost boxes, and they're talking to ghosts, and they're getting answers or information, sometimes from their guides, sometimes from just random ghosts that really don't care for your welfare or benefit. In dowsing, I find that my guides have a direct mutual benefit for me, or they would not be there in the first place. Guides are someone that is volunteered and are there for you to ask questions. The other thing about dowsing that I've been told several times is the distance from your body in which they should be. Some people hold the dowsing rods out quite a distance from themselves, and they say they get a better response and a little more ambulatory response from their questions. But I get lazy and I pull them in, and they're closer to my body. Sometimes a little bit somewhere in the middle works out pretty well. So you can actually take your dowsing rods and tape them off When you get started, an inch at a time, the 12 inches, and then you can ask your guide, like, is it the first of the month? And he will say, no, it's not the first of the month. And then you can say, well, what day of the month is it? And then he can point and try to tell you it's the first, the second, the third, or the 12th day of the month, or whatever. If you're past 12, then you've got to add up. But it's possible to do that. Dowsing is a simple way for a novice to learn on how to communicate with guides if they're not psychic enough to be able to do that. And I feel that you can ask almost any questions you want. Like, let's pull a question out of the air. Let's just suppose that Jesus, the man that we call Jesus in the New Testament, was actually a alien-human hybrid created by the Pleiadians. Is that correct? And he's saying yes. Then if I said Noah of Noah's Ark in the Old Testament, was Noah or that person actually Jewish? And he's saying no. Was he Persian? And he's saying yes. Or Babylonian? No. Was he Sumerian? No. So Noah was not Jewish. And so therefore, the story of Noah, no matter how true it may be, only arrives in the Old Testament because it was taken from another ancient story. Now, getting back to the idea of Noah, is Noah's boat on the side of Mount Ararat? Yes. Has it split in two? Is there two sections of Noah's ship now? Yes. So by satellite, we know that Noah's ship has been split in two, and one of it is down the side of the mountain, a little bit lower than the other side. And just recently, a Chinese Christian expedition on Mount Ararat found one section of the boat, and they claim that it's still there, it's solidly frozen, and there's no way it's going to thaw itself out or decompose with that rate of freezing. So there's almost any question that you would like to ask, your guide can pretty well find the answer a little bit faster, a little bit more informative than what I'm able to do in, like I say, several weeks of research. So trust your guides, ask them yes and no questions, and always think that there's this part and parcel of an exterior force of communicating. Again, we take a look at the human aura, and many people can say, I can see your aura or your electromagnetic field. And when people are sick, their aura will change. When they're healthy and vibrant, their aura will change as well. But the aura, in part and parcel, through the electromagnetics of your body, are able to interact with this exterior force which is all around us. So you may call it a medium of energy, you may call it a spiritual medium of energy, but it's a dynamic form. And what I mean by dynamic is that it never stops really moving. It's always very energetic, and it's never ever stagnant. So dowsing within itself, you can communicate with guides, you can talk to other people through the dowsing technique, but I normally recommend that you talk through your guide to other people, letting the guide decide if this person is in your best interest or not. If anything, the guide can also translate for you to that person. So let's say I'm investigating a haunted house, by example, and there is a ghost there, or an entity that does not belong. I can talk to my guide to talk to him and or angels, and then suggest that person, that consciousness, to be removed. In that case, I don't need to talk directly to the deranged entity that is there. Angels will come, or my guide will handle it, and so they can do that on their level, not really on ours. It's necessary that ghost hunters realize that all the instruments in the world cannot detect when a ghost has been removed. The energy just subsides. But your guides can. Your guides can determine if an entity is present, if the entity has been removed to a neutral location, and if there are angels nearby, Your guide can tell you a lot of things that you cannot see personally. So the idea is dowsing has a place in the paranormal world, as well as showing and demonstrating certain exterior forces that are around us. Remember, no two dowsing rods are the same. They're made by different people. Some are very inexpensive, $4 or $5. Some are very extravagant and very expensive. They come in a case and look very nice. But dowsing is an intriguing way that you can communicate with your guides without being psychic, just allowing the information to go through with you, and make sure that you only talk to a guide, and they'll inform you that they're your guide. That's the idea on dowsing. Thank you very much for watching. You can check out dowsing online and also at several spiritual stores. Always consult with a professional dowser before you attempt it. And like I always say, the more you try, the more you work at it, like riding a bicycle or a horse or driving a car, the better you become. Until pretty soon, it just becomes second nature. A lot of people will quit dowsing for years, but then they'll pick it back up in just a very short time. Conoco and Phillips 66 use dowsers a great deal looking for oil, even today in the 21st century. They are reducing the cost of drilling that will not bear any oil. So when they send out their dowsers are probably 30%, if not 40% better than the equipment that they use in order to find the oil wells in their first place. So many times they'll find an oil well using equipment, but then they send out their dowsers to make sure that it's actually there, or how deep, or if it's the right chemical composition. For every oil well drilled, every oil well that's being drilled costs $25,000. So there's always a gamble. You don't want to drill any more than you have to, and you don't want to waste any more money than you need to. So even corporations that deal with this use dowsing to some extent. And in World War II, during several ocean voyages of supplies to Europe, America military and the British military used dowsers to look for U-boats, to try to find U-boats off these convoys. So when supplies were being shipped, they wanted to make sure the U-boats could be spotted or used, and dowsing was a way they could do that. Their accuracy was high enough to be noted in the annals of war. Also, dowsing was used in Vietnam to find foxholes and underground tunnels left by the Viet Cong. They were taught at Langley, Virginia, on how to dowse. The Marines were taught there by a professional instructor who was also a former Marine. When the Marines got to Vietnam, they pulled out their dowsing rods and they started looking for what they called spider holes. And the spider holes were easily found through dowsing. So dowsing has a place, even in the 21st century, and far beyond the mystic and far beyond the psychic that may be using them. They can be used in practically every way of life, in almost everyday experiences. This has been your host, Michael Lynch, and thank you for watching Exterior Forces.